Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to this breakout session where we'll be discussing the technical merit and cultural relevance scoring categories in more detail. My name is Alison Mattek. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working with the EC Prism team on designing our approach to these scoring categories. With me also is Joanna Wright, who is a graduate student working on this project. Joanna will be fielding questions from the chat, which we will get to during the Q&A portion at the end. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat during the talk. Just know we won't get to it until the very end.
And thanks, Alison. Just so you know, I think we're running a little bit behind schedule, and I'm not sure if they're going to cut us off right at 11:30 or let it go over. So we'll see how the timing goes in terms of questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll try to get to everything we can. There will be an email on the last slide as well where you can follow up with any questions that we don't get to. So during this talk, we will be focused on the two scoring categories, which are technical merit and cultural relevance. I'll go over each of these in a few more detail to give you a sense of the different nuances and details that go into these scoring categories. First, starting with technical merit, as Tyson mentioned in the earlier session, technical merit has two components, reliability and validity. To give brief definitions of these terms, reliability is about the consistency of a measure. We expect a measurement tool to produce the same results under the same conditions. So if it can do that, then it will get a high reliability score. Validity is about accuracy and is more related to theoretical predictions about what measurement results should look like, and if that aligns with what is known in the field and previous research and developed theories about that. So I'll go into these two in a little bit more detail in the next few slides, starting with reliability. We look for three forms of reliability, and I'll give a brief description of what each of these things are. First, test-retest reliability. What we're looking for is consistency of a measurement across time. If a measurement is applied to a participant at time point 1 and time point 2, with all other conditions the same, we expect it to produce the same results. And if it can do that, it will get good test-retest reliability statistics. Internal consistency is about consistency across items within a measure. So if an item or if a measure includes multiple items, all of those items should be measuring the same thing. And if that's true, then it will produce good internal consistency statistics. Inter-rater reliability looks at consistency across trained raters who are using the measurement tool. So many measurement tools require a trained rater to fill out the assessment, and the results of the measurement should be the same regardless of who that rater is. So we look for all three of these and then combined the evidence for each of these subcategories into an overall reliability score. Moving on to validity, we look for 6 forms of validity, and I'm not going to have time to go into detail for all of these, but I'll give a picture of some of them. So content validity, what we look for is the detail and with which the developers defined the concept that the measurement tool is supposed to be measuring and what their process was for consulting content experts when they designed the tool. These 4 here in the middle, I'm kind of going to pool together, and there's essentially a host of different statistical techniques that you can use to identify these types of validity. And what they look at is essentially if the results of a measurement tool are aligning with what is known in the field about what the measurement results should look like, how it aligns with different measurements and different outcomes if it does so as expected. Finally, sensitivity and specificity. This is a statistical technique that's used for measurement tools that screen for a particular outcome or diagnosis. And it looks at the accuracy of the measurement tool in its ability to actually screen for those outcomes. So this is an overall picture of those technical merit subscores and everything I just described. There's more detail on each of these categories on our website, so feel free to go there to review everything that I just said and find even more detail about these subcategories. So now we'll move on to cultural relevance. What our cultural relevance scoring category is about is who the measurement was tested on, who it's applicable to, and how the developers considered different groups and included different groups in the development process. Our cultural relevance scoring bucket has 4 main components, and these are demographics, method bias, measurement bias, and recency. So I'll go over each of these 4 components in a little bit more detail over the next several slides. Our demographics category, what we're looking for is representation along 7 different demographic dimensions. These include age, gender, race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, geographic region, urbanicity, and language group. And what we are looking for is whether the population on which the measure was tested, did it include representation along each of these categories. Our method bias, for looking for method bias, we consider 2 forms of it. And what we look for is the measurement developer's description of who they were considering when they developed the measure, whether they were thinking about diverse populations or whether they specifically defined a targeted population that the measure is aimed at, and what their process was as they were developing it in terms of considering these different populations. We also look specifically for whether they had a method for consulting the targeted population, if they used an approach such as interviewing or focus groups, or some other means of actually getting information about the lived experience of these targeted populations and checking to see whether their approach to designing the measure matched the experiences of the people that they are actually trying to measure. We also look for 2 forms of measurement bias. And so the 2 forms of this, the first one, psychometric differences, this ties into the the technical merit categories that I was discussing earlier in the talk. And what developers can do is they can look to see if those statistics on reliability and validity are different for different subgroups. So they can essentially calculate those statistics separately for subgroups. And then we can look to see whether the quality of the measurement is the same for different groups or not. Item bias includes a suite of statistical approaches that identify whether specific items in the measure are biased against particular groups or not. And what we have found in general with measurement bias is this is one area that's really lacking in a lot of the measurements. Less than 10% of measurements that we've found so far actually include analyses on whether their measurements are biased or not. So this is a huge gap and an area that the field needs to fill to really understand the biases in our measurements. And then finally, the last component of cultural relevance is pretty simple. It just looks at the time frame of when the measure was developed. Measurements that are really old can often be outdated in terms of their concepts and their language. So we just look for how recent the measure has been validated. This slide gives an overall picture of everything I just went over in terms of the cultural relevance scoring bucket and the 4 different subcomponents. So for more information on these and for this list, you can find it on our website for your reference. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the question period. So if there are any questions in the chat, Joanna, you can go ahead and ask those questions.
Sure, thanks, Allison, and thanks everybody for joining. So I know that was a lot of technical information sort of all at once, so you might still be digesting it a little bit. But if you have any particular questions, oh yeah, Rebecca asked, could we please show that last slide once more with all of the different components of scoring?
Yeah, so this slide, this is the cultural relevance scoring buckets here, the 7 dimensions of the demographics and all those different categories we look for in terms of who the measurement was tested on. And then for the method bias, we have those 2 forms of method bias and the process of the developers in terms of who they consulted and who they considered when they were designing the population. The 2 forms of measurement bias, which are looking for psychometric differences, looking for differences in those technical merit statistics, as well as applying specific tests that look directly at item bias in the measure. And then the final category being the recency. So again, this whole list of different categories is in our scoring guidebook, and there's more detailed descriptions of each of these if you would like more information.
And we also had a question, high scoring for cultural relevance. Is that something I can search for specifically? That is a great question because this area is really so important in terms of usability, and we've found is sort of a big gap in the field. So yeah, the question is, can I search for measures that have a higher score in cultural relevance?
Yes, that's one of our search features. Definitely when setting your preferences, you can go to the preference setting and make sure that you type in whatever your cultural relevance criteria is. The scores go from 0 to 10, so wherever you put your threshold, and you can use the filters in order to show only measures that meet those preferences.
And actually, I think if you set your preference, if you were to set the cultural relevance score, say to 10, to the highest possible score, it will order, and then say you're looking for social emotional measures with a high cultural relevance score, it will order the results with those with the highest cultural relevance score at the top. So you can sort of go down from there.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for adding that.
If we have, unless anyone has anything else to chime in, which feel absolutely free. We did have one great question that came up in the last session that we didn't quite get to. Oh, hang on. I understand about how you use the components to determine the score, and the score is noted. Is there a narrative of how you determined that score? So maybe talking a little bit about the scoring PDF.
Yeah, the overall technical, or the score for each bucket.
Yeah, is there sort of a narrative description of all of this, how all of this works?
This would be in the scoring guidebook, and describing in a little bit more detail what kind of criteria we used and what the motivation was behind each of these scoring categories and why it was included, how it was calculated, and the different resources that we used to decide on this sort of structure and organization. So that is, you know, it's in a kind of bulleted form, but there's a paragraph narrative for each section that that describes probably in more detail what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a great question because there are a lot of components. We tried to find the right level of detail for the website for users to understand what are the basic categories, and then that PDF is really sort of a deeper dive into how each of the components works. Any last thoughts? I think they're going to send us back in a minute.
Yeah, we have less than 30 seconds. Yeah, so I just want to thank everyone for coming and for joining this breakout session and for joining this launch event. We're really grateful to see all the interest from the community on all this work that we're doing, and we really appreciate your questions, your comments, your feedback. Again, I'll show this last slide again just so you have